Warning program of the U.S. Department of Labor. Mr. Martin Slate, the Executive Director of the Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation, and Ellen Hennessy, the Deputy Executive Director and Chief Negotiator of the corporation.
Yes.
Mr.
I'm Martin Slate, as you said, the Executive Director of the Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation, and with me is Nell Hennessy, Deputy Executive Director and Chief Negotiator. In a new approach, the Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation is achieving billions of additional pension dollars for workers whose pensions are at risk. PBGC is the federal insurance agency that steps in to pay benefits when a pension plan does not have enough money to pay promised benefits. That is, when a pension is underfunded. Most pensions are well funded, but pension underfunding has become a serious problem. In just the last 5 years, underfunding has climbed from $27 billion to $71 billion. This poses a risk to millions of workers because PBGC's guarantee does not cover all benefits, to the insurance program, which has a deficit, and ultimately to taxpayers who may one day foot the bill. PBGC must already pay benefits to 400,000 people in failed pensions, many from well-known companies.
How many?
400,000 people in failed pensions, many from well-known companies like Pan American and Eastern Airlines. With our new approach, called the Early Warning Program, we prevent losses before they occur, instead of just picking up the pieces when a company goes bankrupt, as we did in the past. Through our efforts, companies have added over $13 billion to the pensions of 1 million people. Key to the program's success is stepping in early and tailoring remedies, targeting those companies representing the biggest risk. PBGC has identified and monitors the 400 large companies that account for 85% of all underfunding. We identify transactions of these companies that might jeopardize retirement benefits, and we negotiate protections within the context of that transaction. A typical situation might involve the sale of a healthy unit, rich in cash, by a corporation with a poorly funded pension. When General Motors expressed a wish to sell EDS, a profitable sub, PBGC negotiated an infusion of $10 billion into GM's hugely underfunded pension, which covers 600,000 auto workers. We customize agreements to the circumstances of individual companies and transactions. We are not one size fits all. We have built up our expertise and technology to meet companies on their own terms. If a company will not negotiate, we will take court action. In this way, we brought protection to 16,000 people in the Western Union pension, underfunded by $400 million. Paul Wood, a retired computer operator at Western Union, wrote us, "Without your presence and brilliant maneuvering, with the principals and the courts involved, both the taxpayers and pensioners of Western Union would have gotten a raw deal." Our program, targeting the biggest risks and getting in early, could be an element of a government program managing risk in any number of areas: banking, farm credit, state insurance agencies. The savings and loan crisis clearly demonstrated the value of identifying risks and resolving potential losses. The results of our work have far exceeded our expectation. 25 major settlements and over $13 billion in the past 2 years alone. Another 9 companies have made large contributions on their own, in part because of the climate our efforts have generated. Our annual list of 50 firms with the largest underfunding has brought awareness and additional funding, further leveraging the program. I have worked since 1971 in enforcement programs in 3 federal agencies. Effective enforcement is essential to good government. But in these times, the public asks us to assure compliance smartly, to cast our net to cast our net carefully, only where the fish are. The early warning program, targeting resources to early action, and creatively tailoring individual solutions is the best way to improve compliance and to meet the public need. Both Ms. Hennessy and I will field your questions.
May I just ask an opening question? You referred to the GM underfunding and the prospective sale of EDS. Would that transfer of, what, $10 billion into the pension fund not have occurred without your program's involvement in it?
I doubt very much that it would have occurred. General Motors wanted to take EDS out of the group, and of course we would have had the leverage of legal action, whether it had been realistic or not. I'm not sure. But no, the answer is that I don't think it would have occurred without our action. General Motors, as you know, is a big part of the problem, sir. They had underfunding that was over $22 billion, and one of the things that we did when we came in is we sort of looked at this as sort of like the Continental Bank of the pension area. We began working with them, and of course they were cooperative. I'm not taking that away with them from them. We began working with them right from the start because we saw this as a very, very major hole in the system.
Yeah. There are three questions pending on the front row, Luis, Barbara, and Tom, and then we've got some on the second row.
Change in legislation or court cases that enabled you to implement this program?
Actually, no. And one of the reasons I think the program was developed was that there was an inability to get a change in legislation. We had sought legislation, the agency had sought legislation in the early 80s to allow them to take targeted action in corporate transactions, which is primarily what the early warning program involves, and was unsuccessful. And so this was a creative response using the legislation that we had to get settlements at a much earlier stage when companies still had money.
Barbara?
I'd like to have you comment, if you will, on the list of 50 and you're turning that list of, badly funded or underfunded pensions over to the media. What is the general response of companies when they suddenly appear on that list of 50 and their local media or their state media or even the national media take after them? Can you tell me what the response is like?
Well, the response actually begins before they appear on the list. I mean, now that the list has been around for a number of years, companies begin to call us in the summer. The list comes out in the fall, and to ask how much money they have to put into their plans in order to get off the list. That's literally. And so we have demystified the process so that they now know exactly how much it is that they have to put in to get off the list, and many companies do it. I mean, I've had discussions with CFOs in which they said, well, how much do you have to pay? And I've said, well, $4 million will drop you to 51. $13 million will drop you to 54. And they put the 13 in.
Tom, and next, David.
My guess is my question's impossible. I have a lot of familiarity with the Pan Am situation. I'm kind of curious that in the case of Eastern and Pan Am, what you could have done for them. Have you thought about some of the people that you're paying off now, or some of the pensions that you're dealing with now, and what remedial action you could have taken in the case of
I think hindsight is always better than foresight. But both of those organizations were involved in leveraging transactions, or Eastern certainly was involved in a leveraging transaction in the 80s. And had the agency gotten itself involved in that transaction and perhaps set it up so that in that case Mr. Lorenzo might have been able to post a little more money to protect the pensions, in the end we might be in better shape. Ultimately, though, there are going to be pension failures. Let's not kid ourselves. What we're here to do is to reduce the losses, to help prevent the failures, but if they do have failures, to cushion the blow.
Can I ask one
Sure.
quick follow-up? I mean, how far does this stick go? I mean, I could see some of my Republican friends not being terribly excited about the idea of the PBGC stepping in and saying, well, I'm not so sure you want to do that leverage buyout, or maybe you want to merge. Can you give me an idea of the parameters of this?
That's one of the real strengths of the program, is that we don't have a big club. Unlike OSHA, these are typically transactions in which everyone would lose if we terminated the plan. mean, if we had terminated the GM plan, our recoveries on a theoretical basis would have been much higher than $10 billion. On the other hand, we would have destroyed GM. Now, you can imagine that if we had gone to our board, which is the Secretary of Labor, the Secretary of Treasury, and the Secretary of Commerce, with a proposal to terminate GM's plan, that we would have had a tough sell.
Last question from David.
Briefly, the federal government for some time has monitored banks and maintains a list of at-risk banks, sort of an early alert, early warning system. How does this program differ in concept from what the government is doing in that area?
I'm not sure that it does. I think what we've learned from the bank situation, and again, hindsight is always better than foresight, is to try to stay ahead of the curve. I think we let that situation go on for too long, and I think, in a sense, we may have been the beneficiary of that because people don't want that. People don't want that to happen, and in fact, to address Mr. Downey's situation, on a bipartisan basis, we've gotten a lot of congressional support here simply because I think people like the fact that we're in a position to stay ahead of the curve.